right, here we go. The Tactical Businessman, episode 77. Hello, my brothers and sisters. This is Garrett Baker, brother in arms, and welcome to another episode of The Tactical Businessman. Today, well, we've got an interesting topic. What does running a marathon have to do with running ads? When I first got into running marathons, it was almost, I don't want to say by fluke, but it kind of was. See, I was in relatively good shape. I would go to the gym 4 to 5 times a week, work out, and then the gym that I was at, which happened to be Lifetime Fitness, had 2 full-size basketball courts. So I would also go play basketball, and I really enjoyed doing that. No, I'm not Michael Jordan, and never will be, but I enjoyed running up and down the court. I'm pretty competitive. And the circumstance that got me into distance running is not actually a good one. A coworker of mine, his daughter died of cancer. And so they decided to raise money. They were going to have a charity race. Now, the money wasn't for them. It was actually for other cancer survivors. And it was really cool how they set it up and how they did it. It was called London's Run. But anyway, I decided that I wanted to contribute, not just financially, but I wanted to run. Well, they had I think a 5K, a 10K, and then they had a half marathon. And I decided that I was going to do the half marathon, right? Because that's what you do when you're competitive. You're like, what's the biggest thing? That's the one that I'm going to do. So I signed up for it. No training specific to anything other than the gym and running up and down a basketball court. Went out and suffered miserably, but completed it and kind of enjoyed it. It was hard. It was something different that I'd never done before. So the next year I did it again. And then from there I said, you know what? What's out here after this half marathon? What is a full marathon? So then I landed on this idea of maybe I should run a full marathon. Now, mind you, up until this point, like in junior high, I ran the mile. That was the farthest that I ran. In high school, I dropped down. I did the hurdles and the long jump, so not really any distance running. And, I played football and I played basketball and I did track and everything, but I never did any distance running. There was no distance in track. There was no cross country. There was none of that. So this was a new world to me. Well, what do you do when there's something new? You go to the internet and you Google it. And I Googled how to run a marathon. And I came across a guy. His name is Hal Higdon. And he had some training programs. So I downloaded this training program. And it was based on time and distance. And I was like, cool, like I could do this. It's going to be hard, but I could do this. And then I figured, well, I probably should sign up for a race. So I started looking around. And summertime was going to be coming up soon. So I was like, oh, well, what do we have available here in the state? And I live in Arizona. And there was a race called the Whiskey Row Marathon. It was up in northern Arizona, up at one of the towns up there called Prescott. And I was like, you know what? There was some background with that as well. That's actually where my father grew up, where my grandparents lived. So I really liked the area. I was like, oh, well, that's a good one to start off with. Let's do that one. So I downloaded this training plan and it gave me the day of the week and it gave me the pace that I should be running at and it gave me the mileage based on the time that I wanted to finish in, which my first one was 4 hours. Like I wanted to finish in 4 hours. First time I was like, oh, that's a good healthy target. So I went on this training plan. Now this was a 4-month training plan. So it took a lot of time. And where I was living at the time, here in Phoenix area, there's really not a lot of hills to begin with, but there were 0 hills, like no inclines, it was just flat. And that's where I grew up. So that's where I would do my training runs, be it 4 miles or 8 miles or 12 or 16 or 20, whatever the training plan called for, that's what I would do. And all I had with me was my stopwatch, a water bottle, like one of these like plastic Costco 24-pack water bottles. And that was it. And it wasn't even the cool like Garmin watches, right? It was one of those like just a basic stopwatch. It's like Walmart special or something. And I bought a pair of running shoes, the same running shoes that I always ran in, which were Nikes, of course. a product of their advertisements over the years. And I started training. And I started running and running and running and running. Now, I wasn't exactly on track for every run that I had, but I was relatively close. So the days got closer. I started to get some pain in my legs. Some of you may be familiar with this, your IT bands. My calves started to tighten up, lower back, all these things which comes from excessive wear and tear and not taking care of yourself. None of which I knew at the time. Again, never having been in this space before. So the race comes and we drive up to Prescott. Well, I knew this ahead of time, but I didn't pay attention to it. Phoenix's elevation is about sea level, maybe a few hundred feet above. Prescott, however, is a mile high. Yes, just like Denver, it's a mile high. And I didn't take that into consideration. Of course, I didn't know how much altitude would affect me either. Call it ignorance or whatever you want to call it, but I was not prepared. The other thing I wasn't prepared for was the course. Like, I didn't go to the website ahead of time and say, oh, well, let me see what the course looks like. How many hills are there? Any of that. No, it was strictly, I showed up with my water bottle. By the way, it was just water. There was nothing else in there. And my running shoes and my watch. Like, that was it. Showed up for race day. Felt super confident because I knew the area. And that was about it. So I lined up. Boom, gun goes off. And off I go. And I'm looking at my watch, trying to keep pace, kind of, but just like gauging from the miles, not really being able to. Well, again, there was one thing or two things that affected me heavily on this race. One was the elevation, and two was the hills. Yeah, you guessed it. If something is a mile high, odds are that there's probably going to be some hills or even more some mountains. And in this case, there were. The first few miles were rolling hills, up and down, up and down, up and down, which I managed to. I was like, okay, stay steady. You know, don't go too hard on the uphills, and you can go faster on the downhills. And then about 7 miles in, we hit a mountain. That's right, a freaking mountain. And so I start running up the mountain, right? It's this dirt road up this mountain, and I'm like, well, it better end soon. Well, it should end soon. Well, how come this damn mountain isn't ending? And finally, we get to the top of the mountain, and I was thinking, that's it. Oh, no, we had to go another, I think, 1.5 miles or 2 miles down the other side of the mountain before we turned around and went backwards. It was an out and back. And we get to the halfway point, and at this point, I'm like spent. I'm done. But I'm telling myself, you got this. You've made it halfway. You'll be going downhill. It'll be so much easier. So I grab some water from the table and go back up these couple miles back to the top of the mountain. By the time I get there, I'm like, I'm done. So I'm walking, and then they have a table set up. They have usually some water, some Gatorade type product, and then they'll have some goos or some fruit or something. Well, this time they had a bunch of fruit. So I'm eating like apples and oranges and bananas and swallowing Gatorade, like everything. It was like I hadn't eaten in like a week. And so now my stomach is sloshing around with all this stuff I'm trying to now overcompensate for because I wasn't prepared, trying to run down a mountain. Now, you would think that running down a mountain is easier. Why? Because you're running downhill. Well, the problem is that it actually affects your quads a lot more than you think, especially if it's for an extended period of time. So I was already tired, and here I am going down this mountain. Now my quads start to hurt. My IT bands start to hurt. Everything starts to hurt. I got no water because I didn't fill up my little water bottle, and the water stations are few and far between. I get to the last probably 10 miles, and it became a walk run for me. And by walk run, I mean mostly walk and a little bit of run. Finally get to the finish line thinking I'm going to die. And like that was it. I crossed the finish line. I was like, man, that was one of the hardest things that I've ever done. And of course, my wife and the kids are there, and they're asking, so how'd it go? And I'm looking at my watch. And the only thing I can think of is how pissed off I am at the fact that I wasn't anywhere close to the time that I wanted to run. In fact, I was like 4 hours and 30 some odd minutes, 4 hours and 40. I don't know. I was almost 40 minutes slower than I wanted to be. And I was like, well, what happened? And I trained and all this stuff. Mind you, still hadn't taken into account the hills and the elevation. So after you run a marathon, you need to give your body time to recover. At least if you're doing things right, you're supposed to. Well, myself, I didn't take any of this, again, into consideration. I had already signed up for a second marathon within 3 weeks. That's right. 3 weeks, a second marathon. This time in the state of Idaho. whereas rolling hills, potato country. So I was feeling a little better, right? My IT bands were still hurting. My legs were still hurting, but I was feeling better. And of course, start the race and I'm going super fast. And of course, the wheels fall off at about halfway through and I run through the end of that one. But this time my quads were like, they were swollen. I mean, it just didn't even fit in my pants. It was bad. They were black and blue. It was horrible. And, again, I was pissed off because I didn't hit my time and all these other things. And I was walking. And as I started to go down this recovery path, if you will, my body wasn't recovering. And it literally took me, I kid you not, probably 8 months before my body was somewhat back to normal. Because through my own stupidity, I had to learn all about rehab. I had to learn all about IT bands. I had to learn all about the right shoes. I had to learn all about the right nutrition. I had to learn about elevation training. I had to learn about hills. Like I had to learn about all of these things that I'd never even considered before. In other words, life gave me a reality check. Like I crossed the finish line of my first marathon and life gave me a little fist bump. They're like, boom, hey, great job, man. Like you finished a marathon. And now what? Like, are you going to stop? Basically, life told me, hey, here's your fist bump. Welcome to the game. Now you got to learn how to play. And I spent the next years, we'll call it, probably 7-8 years, figuring out how to properly run a marathon, right? And if you want to have any success with a marathon, you ask any of the elite runners, they're going to have some things in common. They're going to have a coach. They're going to have a nutrition plan. They're going to have a training plan. They're going to have the right shoes. They're going to have a recovery plan. They're going to have all of these things outside of being able to run. Why? Because if they don't, the chance of their success goes down to almost zero, which is what I experienced. Now, what does this have to do with running ads? By the way, I just spent 12 minutes talking about my first and second marathon. Thank you very much. Okay, so ads. The other day, probably about 2 weeks ago, I deployed a new program. And in this program, one of the first things I did was deploy ads. And so after the first week, I got a hold of my marketing guy and I'm like, hey man, like, what do our numbers look like? And he's like, fine. And I asked him, well, what does fine mean? That's kind of a loose term. And so he's like, all right, well, let's jump on a call. So if we jump on a Zoom call, he shows me my numbers, like specifically, hey, here's your click-through rate. Here's your cost per click. Here's your conversion. Here's what percentage of the videos that people have watched. He's going through all these details. And now it's like completely blowing my mind. And I'm like, and so what does this all mean? He goes, nothing yet. You haven't given this enough time. Like we haven't even narrowed down your ideal audience yet. And I was immediately taken back to this first marathon, which is like, hey, congratulations, you got your first marathon in. Congratulations, you got your first week of ads in. Here's your fist bump. Welcome to the game. In other words, this isn't going to be a short-term thing. You're going to need to acquire all of these tools. You're going to start to deploy more ads. You're going to have to deploy more content. You're going to have to be more specific about your message. You're going to have to do all of these things in order to have the measured success that you want to have. Just like with me in the marathon, literally 7 years it took me, most of it, we'll call it school of hard knocks, but 7 years to figure out that in order for me to have any success, I needed all those things. Well, it's not going to take me 7 years in ads. If it does, then something's horribly wrong. However, it was a reality check for me saying, hey, listen, life is not easy. Business is not easy. Marriage is not easy. It's a process that takes time. And it doesn't just involve your grit. It doesn't involve your hard work. It doesn't involve your desire to hustle and grind. Sure, that's a piece of it. But there's so much more that goes into it. Like I think about going back to my marathon, why was that I had success at the end? One was consistency, right? Willing to show up every day and do the work. 2 was listening to my coach. Literally have a coach say, hey, I need you to do this. Then I would do that. 3, the nutrition plan. Like, this is what you have to eat. This is when you have to eat it. The right equipment, the right recovery. Like, all of these things contributed to my success in running marathons. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to ads. If I want to have success, guess what? Got to listen to the marketing guy. Guess what? Got to deploy the content. Guess what? Got to be consistent with the message. Guess what? Like, and I could just keep going down the line. So if you're asking yourself right now why you're not having success in your ads, Well, there's probably a reason why. If you're asking yourself why you're not having success in your marriage, there's probably a reason why. If you're asking yourself why you're not having success with your body, there's probably a reason why. Just showing up gets you nothing more than the fist bump. Hey, congratulations, you showed up. But that's all life's going to give you. You're going to have to earn the rest of it, which comes through consistency. It comes through hard work. It comes through proper planning. It comes through using a coach. Like all of these things come into play. So if you really want your business to be successful, then learn all the tools and all the pieces that need to go into your daily activity in order to make it successful. If you want to have a successful marriage, guess what? It's not just showing up one day, taking off your pants and being like, hey, it doesn't work. Trust me, I've tried it. Like there's so much more that goes into it, right? You have to be able to date your wife. You have to have good communication. You have to do this. There's all these things that go into it. Same thing with your body. I'm not saying you have to run a marathon, but if you're a couch potato, if your ass hasn't gone to the gym in years, well, it's going to be a process, right? You're not just going to show up and bench press 225. You're not just going to show up and run a 6-minute mile. You're not just going to show up and clean, 185 pounds. Like it's not going to happen. It takes time. But you can shrink that time down if you're willing to invest in what matters most, which is, drum roll please, you. That's right, you. The key to this whole thing is you. Successful business, you. Successful marriage, you. Successful body, you. Like it all comes down to you. So understand that you can be like me in my first couple of marathons and just show up and think that it's all going to work out, and it's not. Or you can be like me in the tail end of my marathons and where I am right now with ads, which is, hey, I understand this process. I understand the pieces, and I will consistently deploy these pieces to make sure that I have the success that I'm looking after. All right, that's it for today. Listen, if you're curious about how you can be more, do more, and ultimately get more, we got something for you. It's called the Tactical Businessman. It's a 60-day program that I've set up specifically for businessmen trying to get more out of life. Want to learn more? Go to thetacticalbusinessman.com. All right, that's it for today. As always, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next one.